Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, where pharmacists can fill your pet's prescriptions, helping you pamper and protect your pet with pills, peanut butter, toys, and treats. Stop into the store today or visit Safeway.com.
Happy Friday. This weekend, National Park Week wraps up. We have 4 national parks in Colorado. Can you name them? Rocky Mountain, Mesa Verde, Great Sand Dunes, and Black Canyon of the Gunnison. It is forecast to be a beautiful spring weekend, and it's a good time to go to Rocky, in particular, before you'll have to get a timed entry pass starting in late May. I'm Bazi Kanani. Coming up, your wildfire outlook for 2025. How bad things get is partly about the conditions, but also
about 90% of fires nationally are caused by people.
Then, how a man who always maintained his innocence finally got a court to agree.
They're pointing and they are upset and they're saying, I am certain that that man shot at me.
Plus, a dispute over student athletes who are trans. Also, for those in middle age,
whenever you hear midlife, immediately you'll think crisis.
A gathering this weekend to prove it doesn't have to be that way. It's Friday, April 25th. Here's the news in Colorado today. Spring means tall grass and high winds in many parts of Colorado, and those are dangerous conditions for wildfires.
How is the hike on that last road?
State firefighting crews trained last weekend in Rocky Mountain National Park.
So a little high. If you could bring it down, that's great. But
Nate Alexander was there. He's a helicopter operations specialist.
So, you can cross your fingers, but hope's not a strategy, right? So we got to prepare for the worst.
CPR's Ishan Thakur just heard from state and federal officials about what they expect for wildfires in Colorado the rest of this year. Ishan, how are wildfire conditions looking around the state?
Governor Polis and other state officials said conditions this year for most of the state were basically going to be normal or average. But normal still means around 6,000 wildfires. 6,000
is more than I would have guessed.
Yeah, normal is still a really busy year. And so we're never going to hear about most of these 6,000 fires. They're going to be contained. But when you pair it with the potential for really high wind events, some of those are going to get big. And there's really no way around that.
You mentioned wind. What about moisture? How's the moisture level this year?
So it's been relatively normal in northern and central Colorado, but the southeastern part of the state is experiencing some pretty serious drought conditions. So they're going to have an elevated fire risk in April and May. Later in summer, that elevated risk is going to shift towards southwest Colorado, according to the governor. And another thing that officials wanted to make clear is that it's not just firefighters who have a role to play during fire season. About 90% of fires nationally are caused by people. So it's up to Coloradans to be really careful.
Definitely. How long does our fire season typically last?
So typically it stretches from May until September, so that's 4 months. But as we know from the Marshall Fire and other fires in recent years, there's no real fire season anymore. State officials at this event now call it a fire year.
President Trump has made cuts to the Forest Service. Will there be an impact on firefighting in Colorado this year because of that?
That came up a lot at this event. So a Forest Service official said that fire and law enforcement have been exempt from federal cuts. He said they'll have over 700 firefighters ready by the summer, and they're hiring now. But Colorado depends on around 500 AmeriCorps staffers to do mitigation work. So that's chopping down trees, clearing brush. The governor said he's not entirely sure what the status of that program is, but as of yesterday, they're still ready to be deployed. On the other hand, Governor Polis said federal workers who ticket folks for starting illegal fires or who do road maintenance, those have been cut back.
Still some staffing concerns then. We heard some sound from the training event, and one spokesperson there stressed that wildfires know no boundaries.
Yeah, fires jump from state to tribal to private land all the time. I watch state, federal, and local partners all stand together, behind a lectern under a giant American flag to demonstrate that they were in lockstep. And they said that was crucial, because dumping 600 gallons of water from a helicopter requires a huge amount of prep, like actually knowing where the target is, as well as super skilled pilots who can get the job done.
And we are grateful for their skill. Thanks, Ishan.
Thanks so much, Fozzie.
A man who was wrongfully convicted got out of prison on Wednesday. James Cass Garner spent nearly 15 years locked up for a bar shooting that happened in Adams County in 2009.
3 brothers were out at a bar near closing time. An altercation happens and a shooting erupts, and those 3 brothers are shot at.
Jeannie Siegel is a lawyer with the Corey Wise Innocence Project at CU Boulder who helped get Garner out.
The 3 brothers provide descriptions of the shooter. Nobody matches Mr. Garner. He becomes a suspect because there's evidence that he was at the scene that night, namely a pair of eyeglasses and his girlfriend's cell phone. So based on that, they put him in this photo array and nobody identifies him as the shooter.
Regardless, Siegel says months after the shooting, Garner found himself in a courtroom in what's called a show-up lineup.
Show-up lineups are really frowned upon in eyewitness identification procedures, and that's where a witness is just shown one person.
She said that makes witnesses more likely to feel that person did it.
It's not a test of memory anymore because it's very clear who the suspect is in a courtroom. And they're pointing and they are upset and they're saying, I'm certain that that man shot at me. Those statements are really powerful to a jury.
In this one-person lineup in the courtroom, the victims identified Garner as the shooter, and he was convicted. He lost appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case. Meanwhile, his lawyer says Garner had grandkids born whom he'd never met. The Innocence Project took up the case, and in a hearing this month, it argued with new expert testimony about the problems with the ways Garner was identified.
So we were back in trial court, back in front of the same trial judge that oversaw the initial trial.
They said the brothers' failure to identify Garner the very first time they saw his picture should have proved his innocence.
There was no evidence that he was the shooter. There was evidence solely that he was at the bar, and that should not be enough to subject somebody to everything that followed.
The judge quickly agreed, and on Wednesday, he got out. His family rushed up to hug him.
It was really heartwarming and, also tragic to think about the years that were taken from him.
Siegel, the attorney, says Garner will file a civil claim to try to get financial compensation for his wrongful conviction, and that his story is not unique. Colorado law says trans girls can play girls' high school sports, but a group of school leaders in Colorado has demanded they be banned. This week, the organization that governs school sports across the state tried to clarify. Arlo talked with CPR's Stina Sieg about what happened. And a warning here, this story mentions self-harm.
Stina, how did this all start?
So earlier this month, a group of school leaders from district and charter and private schools, they sent this letter with a demand that trans girls not be allowed to participate in girls' sports. And they said the state must comply with an executive order from President Trump that's basically to the same effect. And they sent it to the Colorado High School Activities Association, which governs school sports.
And to clarify, did this come from actual school districts or individuals?
It was mostly individuals who signed it on behalf of themselves, and in some cases representing their entire school or their entire school board. We're talking big communities like Pueblo and small rural spots like Delta. And I talked to one of the signers, Andrea Heights. She's the president of Mesa County's District 51 school board here in Grand Junction.
I think we need to keep biological girls sports for biological girls and biological boys sports for biological boys. I just think that's the best way to keep it safe, and I think it's the best way to keep girls' opportunities for girls.
Heights is concerned that cisgender girls could be hurt in sports and that trans girls could win scholarships over cisgender girls.
So for me, it's more about representing that and the protection of girls in those spaces around their physical safety and the protection of their opportunities.
In the letter that she signed, they say that they've heard from parents, coaches, and athletes and did not want to, quote, stand idly by as their trust in our athletic programs erodes. That's language from the letter.
On the other hand, Colorado's current law is meant to protect trans kids and give them opportunities to participate, right?
Yeah, and I think we need to point out that there are very few trans athletes in high school sports. And trans advocates believe that the views expressed by these school officials in this letter, they don't take into account the bullying and violence toward trans female athletes. And they also don't take into account puberty blockers. Javi Saenz is a trans man, drag performer, and an activist in Delta.
Well, if they actually do some education and understand that usually using blockers prevents biological boys from looking like biological boys.
Now, Stina, you just mentioned bullying. Being a teenager is already hard, and with a letter like this, does Saenz worry that it will have a negative effect on trans kids' mental health?
Yeah, he does, and so does One Colorado, the queer advocacy group. One of the issues is that this letter refers to trans girls as males or biological males. It never actually says the words trans girls. And many transgender people find that kind of framing harmful. Saenz says that by not allowing transgender girls to play girls' sports, you're basically isolating someone who's already from a vulnerable community.
Every right, everything you take away from us and every horrible word they say about us, that's another kid that could be dying by suicide or self-harming, doing drugs, because they're not accepted for just being them.
This really shows how important sports can be for these kids. How did the high school sports governing organization respond?
So the organization known as CHASA responded with its own letter on Tuesday, saying that school leaders should be allowed to act in accordance with their own values while, quote, honoring the legal obligations that govern their institutions. So I think what the Activities Association is saying here is that they don't have the authority to determine whether trans girls can play in girls' sports or not. That's up to federal law and state law. And right now that's really complicated because Colorado law says they can play and a Trump executive order says they cannot.
So then where do we go from here?
The Trump administration has not announced any action over Colorado's trans athlete law, but it is suing Maine over its similar law.
Stina Sieg, thank you so much.
Thanks.
You may know what it's like to hit a wall or a ceiling in your career. A Colorado Springs woman named Barbara Brooks is particularly talking to people who hit it in midlife.
Because whenever you hear midlife, immediately you'll think crisis. Just the term midlife.
This weekend, Brooks hosts an event in Denver for women over 40, finding what she calls their second act.
I will be talking about aging out loud. And what does that mean to own this time in our lives and to be prideful of the chapter number?
She wants to rename this stage in the middle of life with a term like middlescence, or
I like to also say midlife quest. If you're going to put crisis, let's just say it's a midlife quest. They say that it goes until your early 70s because of how long we're living and how active we are these days.
Brooks' event in Denver this weekend features workshops led by startup founders and experts on things like caregiving for aging parents and physical changes like menopause.
It's great that we're finally talking about it, that it's not hidden, that this is a part of life. It's who we are.
Who she is at this stage of life is an advocate and public speaker, a former marketing executive whose mission is more clear to her now than ever before.
As the pro-ager and a pro-age speaker and intergenerational advocate, I'm all about really championing women and the rally cry for myself and second act women, and all that I do is aging out loud, owning this time. And aging is living.
You can find more about Brooke's work at the link in our show notes. You'll also find a link there to check out CPR's series called Aging Matters. Reporting for today's show also came from CPR's Elaine Tassi, Haley May, and Rachel Estabrook. Colorado Today is made possible by listeners. Thanks for your support. Be sure to follow Colorado Today in your podcast app and leave a review. I'm Bazi Kanani. This is CPR News.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, where pharmacists can fill your pet's prescriptions, helping you pamper and protect your pet with pills, peanut butter, toys, and treats. Stop into the store today or visit Safeway.com.